I watched them put handcuffs on my 17-year-old daughter, and I didn't stop them. It was early morning, the kind of quiet that makes everything feel too loud. Two officers stood in my living room, and Ava was right there in front of me, still in her pajamas, her eyes red and swollen from crying. One of the officers read her Miranda rights in a flat, emotionless voice, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. And maybe he had. But I hadn't. I'd never seen anything like this in my life, and the person at the center of it was my own child. Before they walked her out, Ava turned to me, her hands already locked behind her back, and with a voice that cracked right down the middle, she said to me, "Mom, I didn't do it. Please. You have to believe me." I stood there frozen. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My sister Diane stood quietly near the hallway, and my mom looked anywhere but at me. At that moment, I thought I was doing the right thing. I had no idea that 3 days earlier, everything had already been decided for me. Hi everyone, my name is Melissa, I'm 38 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened just a few months ago, and it nearly destroyed my relationship with my daughter. I'm a licensed practical nurse, working night shifts at a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been doing this for over 10 years. Long hours, short sleep, and a whole lot of trying to hold everything together. I'm a single mom. Have been for a while now. And honestly, I'd gotten pretty good at it. Or at least, I thought I had. To save money, Ava and I were living with my mom and my older sister Diane in a house on the west side of Phoenix. It wasn't my first choice, but it made sense financially. My mom is 65, retired, and she'd always been the kind of woman who kept the peace no matter what. Diane is 42, my older sister, and at the time she was going through a rough patch. No steady job, some debt she never really talked about, and a lot of tension she carried around like a second skin. The three of us adults under one roof was already its own kind of complicated, but I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved up enough to get Ava and me our own place. Ava, my daughter, she was 17 at the time. Smart, responsible, the kind of kid who reminded me to take my vitamins and texted me when she got home safe. She wasn't perfect, but she was honest. That was the thing about Ava. She'd always been honest with me, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Looking back now, I wish I'd held on to that a little tighter. There was always a low hum of tension in that house. Little things. The way Diane would make comments about money. The way my mom would go quiet when things got uncomfortable, instead of saying what she actually thought. And me, I was the one always trying to smooth things over, always trying to keep everyone from fighting. I told myself I was being the bigger person, but really, I was just avoiding the problem. I trusted the wrong people, and I paid for it in a way I never saw coming. That night felt normal, until a phone call at 11:42 p.m. changed everything. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I saw was the car, and my heart dropped. I'd just finished a double shift, 12 hours on my feet, and all I wanted was a glass of water and my bed. But the second my headlights swept across the front of the house, I knew something was wrong. Our car, a silver Honda Civic that Diane and I shared, was sitting at a crooked angle near the curb. The front bumper was crumpled, the right headlight was shattered, and there were long scrape marks running down the passenger side like someone had dragged it against a wall. I sat in my seat for a moment, just staring at it. My hands were still on the steering wheel. Right then, a cold feeling crept up the back of my neck, slow and heavy. I got out of the car and walked toward the house. The front door swung open before I even reached the steps. My mom came rushing out, her hands wringing together, her voice already high and tight with panic. She grabbed my arm and said to me, "Something happened tonight. You need to come inside right now." I stepped into the house, and the first person I saw was Diane. She was sitting on the couch with a bag of ice pressed against her forearm, her face pale and tight. Then I saw Ava. My daughter was standing near the kitchen doorway, leaning against the wall. Her face was drained of color. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, and she was swaying just slightly, like she was having trouble keeping steady on her feet. The smell hit me a second later. Faint, but there. Alcohol. My stomach turned. I looked at Ava and said to her, keeping my voice as level as I could, "Ava, what happened? Are you okay?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mom, I can explain. Just listen to me, please." But before she could say another word, Diane cut in from the couch, her voice sharp and certain. Wincing slightly as she adjusted the ice pack, she looked straight at me and said, "She was driving, Melissa. She took the car without asking, and she was drunk. I tried to stop her, and she hit a wall on Cactus Road." The room went still. I looked at my mom. Standing near the hallway, she pressed her lips together and nodded slowly, then said to me, "I saw it too. Ava came home upset about something, and she just grabbed the keys. By the time I realized what was happening, they were already gone." I turned back to Ava. She was shaking her head, her arms crossed tight over her chest, and I could see her jaw working like she was trying to hold back tears. She looked right at me and said, "That's not what happened. I wasn't driving. I wasn't." But the words came out broken and unsteady. And standing there in that moment, looking at a crumpled car, a sister with an injury, and a daughter who could barely stand straight, I didn't know what to hold on to. My mind was spinning. Everything around me felt like it was pressing in from all sides. I was exhausted, I was scared, and 3 people I trusted were all pointing in the same direction. Standing there in that living room, I didn't know who to believe. But inside that house, 3 people were about to give me the same answer. I asked one simple question. What happened? And that's when everything turned against my daughter. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at all 3 of them. Diane was still on the couch. My mom had pulled a chair close to her. Ava was standing near the hallway, arms wrapped around herself, not saying anything. I was still in my scrubs, still had my hospital ID clipped to my pocket, and I was running on no sleep and a stomach full of dread. I looked at Diane and said to her, slowly and clearly, "Start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what happened tonight." Diane set the ice pack down on the cushion beside her. She straightened up, looked me in the eye, and with a calm, steady voice that I remember feeling almost too composed for the situation, she said to me, "I was in my room around 9. I heard Ava come home from her friend's house. She seemed off, like something was bothering her. I came out to check on her, and she smelled like she'd already been drinking before she even got back here." She paused for a second, then continued, "I tried to talk to her. I told her to just go to bed and sleep it off. But she kept saying she needed to drive somewhere. I don't know where. She wouldn't tell me. I told her no. I said the keys stay on the hook. And she just asked. She grabbed them anyway." Right then, I felt something tighten in my chest. I glanced over at Ava. She was staring at the floor, her jaw clenched. My mom leaned forward in her chair then, folding her hands in her lap, and added with a quiet but firm voice, "I came out of my room when I heard them arguing in the kitchen. I saw Ava with the keys in her hand. And when Diane tried to take them back, Ava pulled away and went straight to the car. She looked at me with tired, serious eyes and said, 'I watched from the window. The car went down the street fast. Too fast. I knew it wasn't going to be good.' The air in that room felt thick. I turned to Diane again and asked her, 'And you were in the car?' She nodded, shifting the ice pack back onto her arm, and said to me, 'I ran out and got in because I didn't want her going alone. I thought maybe I could calm her down, but she wouldn't slow down. She clipped a wall on Cactus Road, and that's when I hit my arm on the door. We managed to get the car back here, but it was already done. 3 people. 3 versions that all lined up perfectly. Same details, same direction, same conclusion." Throughout all of this, Ava hadn't moved from the hallway. I looked over at her and said, "Ava, I need to hear from you. Right now." She lifted her head. and for just a moment, something flashed across her face. Not guilt, something closer to desperation. She took a step toward me and said, her voice cracking at the edges, "Mom, I did not drive that car tonight. I wasn't drinking here. Yes, I had something at Jenna's house earlier, but I was fine by the time I got home. I was in my room. I was asleep. I don't even know what they're talking about." Diane let out a short breath, almost like a laugh, and said without even looking at Ava, "She was asleep. Right. The whole neighborhood probably heard the car." My mom shook her head slowly and said in a low voice, "Honey, we were both right there. We both saw it." And just like that, Ava's version got buried. Not with shouting. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Just quietly, efficiently, two voices over one. I watched it happen and I didn't stop it. The exhaustion was pulling at me. The smell of alcohol had been real. The damage to the car was real. Diane's injury was real. And sitting across from my own daughter, I felt something I'm ashamed to admit. I felt doubt. Not anger, not certainty, just that slow, sickening doubt that fills the space where trust used to be. Ava looked at me one more time, her eyes wet, and said quietly, "Please don't do this. Please just believe me." I looked away. 3 people told the same story, and I chose to believe them. The next morning, I made a decision I still regret. The next morning, my daughter stood in front of me and said 5 words I'll never forget. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd laid in bed for a few hours with my eyes closed, but my mind wouldn't stop running. By the time the sun came up, I was already sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Ava came downstairs around 7. She was still in her pajamas, her hair messy, her eyes puffy from crying. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she walked over, pulled out the chair across from me, sat down, and looked me straight in the eyes. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. She said to me, "Mom, I didn't drive that car." Right then, something inside me pulled in 2 directions at once. Part of me wanted to reach across that table and tell her I believed her. But the other part, the part that had spent all night replaying Diane's calm face and my mom's steady nod, that part held me back. I set my coffee cup down and said to her, keeping my voice flat and measured, "Ava, there were 2 witnesses. Both of them saw the same thing. The car is wrecked. Diane got hurt." She leaned forward and said, louder this time, "I know what they said. But they're lying. I was in my room. I was asleep. Why would I lie to you about this?" I looked at her for a long moment, and then I said something I wish I could take back. I said to her, "Because teenagers lie when they're scared of getting in trouble. That's why." The second it left my mouth, I saw her face change. Not crumble. Change. Like something behind her eyes just quietly shut off. She sat back in her chair and went very still. After a moment, she said to me in a voice so flat, it scared me more than crying would have, "Okay, so you've already decided." I told her that until I knew the full truth, she was grounded. No phone except for school, no going out. And if the car situation turned into something more serious, we'd deal with it together. But my tone made it clear I didn't really believe the together part. She nodded once. Then she got up, pushed her chair back in carefully, and walked back upstairs without another word. No slamming doors, no yelling, just silence. And somehow that silence was worse than anything she could have said. Over the next 2 days, Ava moved through that house like a ghost. She went to school, came home, went straight to her room. She answered me when I asked direct questions, but nothing more. No good mornings. No asking what was for dinner. No sitting near me on the couch the way she used to. The warmth that had always existed between us, that easy, comfortable thing we'd built over 17 years, it was gone. And I kept telling myself she was just being dramatic. I kept telling myself she'd come around once she accepted responsibility. But late at night, lying in that same bed where I couldn't sleep, I'd hear her moving around in her room above mine, and something in my gut would twist. Not guilt exactly, more like a warning I wasn't ready to listen to yet. I thought I was teaching her a lesson. I didn't realize I was losing her. 2 days later, things got worse. I was halfway through my shift when my phone rang, and everything escalated beyond control. It was a Tuesday night. I was on hour 7 of a 12-hour shift, restocking supplies in one of the back hallways when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me look at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. Phoenix area code. I stepped into the stairwell and picked up. The man on the other end identified himself as Officer Reyes from the Phoenix Police Department. His voice was calm and professional, and he said to me, "Is this Melissa Carter?" I said yes. And then he said, "I'm calling regarding a vehicle incident that occurred on Cactus Road this past Sunday night. We've received a statement from a witness in the area, and based on what's been reported, we need to speak with your daughter Ava Carter regarding possible charges." I felt the wall behind me before I realized I'd stepped back into it. My hand tightened around the phone. I said to him, "What kind of charges?" There was a brief pause, and then Officer Reyes said to me, "We're looking at reckless driving and driving under the influence. Your daughter is a minor, so the process will involve you as her parent. We'd like to schedule a time to come by and talk." I don't remember exactly what I said next. Something about, "Yes, of course, whatever you need." I wrote down the time he gave me. I thanked him, and then I stood in that stairwell for what felt like a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. DUI charges, reckless driving. My 17-year-old daughter. The words sat in my chest like stones. By the time I got back to the floor, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept making small mistakes, losing my count, forgetting where I'd put things. A colleague named Rita noticed and pulled me aside near the nurse's station. She looked at me carefully and said, "Melissa, you okay? You look pale." I told her I'd gotten some bad news and I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I finished my shift on autopilot and drove home in a kind of numb, hollow silence. When I walked through the front door, Diane was in the living room watching TV. She looked up at me with an expression that was hard to read, something between concern and calm, and said to me, "Long night?" I told her the police had called. I watched her face closely when I said it. She didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly and said to me, "Well, I figured they might. There was a witness on that street. I guess someone called it in." And right there, something small but sharp pricked at the back of my mind. Not loud enough to stop me, not clear enough to name, but it was there. I asked her if she'd said anything to the police herself. She shook her head and said, "Not yet. But if they ask me, I'll tell them the truth. That's all I can do, the truth." The word landed differently than it should have. I went upstairs and knocked on Ava's door. She opened it and looked at me with those same flat, guarded eyes she'd been wearing for 2 days. I told her the police had called. I told her there might be charges. And I watched something move across her face, something that wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to defeat. She said to me, her voice barely above a whisper, "So this is actually happening." I told her we'd get through it. I told her we'd figure it out, but even as the words came out, they felt hollow. Because the truth was, I still believed she'd done it. I still thought I was managing a situation my daughter had created. I was trapped inside a version of events that 3 people had built for me, and I didn't even know it yet. That's when something inside me started to crack. But I still didn't have proof. Until the truth found me. It started with something small. Something I almost ignored. The day after the police called, I had the morning off. I decided to walk to the corner store a few blocks down, mostly just to get out of the house and clear my head. The neighborhood was quiet. One of those dry Phoenix mornings where the air already feels warm before 9 and the sidewalks are mostly empty. I was on my way back, a paper bag in my hand, when I ran into our neighbor Frank Delgado. He's been on our street for about 12 years. retired, the kind of man who's always out front trimming something or checking his mail. He waved at me from his driveway, and I stopped to say hello because that's just what you do with Frank. We talked about nothing for a minute. The weather, his hip. Then he tilted his head slightly and said to me, in that casual but careful way people talk when they're not sure how much to say, "Hey, everything okay over at your place?" Sunday night was pretty loud. I told him we'd had a little situation with the car. He nodded slowly, then said to me, "Yeah, I heard the engine. Heard some voices too, out front. Sounded like an argument before the car took off." I shifted the bag in my arms and said to him, "Right. It was a stressful night." He looked at me for a second, like he was deciding something, then said, "I only mention it because the person I saw get in the driver's side. It didn't look like your daughter." I only caught a glimpse from my window, but it looked more like the other woman, the taller one. I went completely still. The words moved through me slowly, like they were trying to find somewhere to land. I said to him, keeping my voice steady, "Are you sure about that?" Frank scratched the back of his neck and said, "I mean, it was dark, and I wasn't wearing my glasses. I'm not going to swear on it. But that was my impression. I just figured you all had it sorted out." I told him thank you. I said we were handling it. And then I kept walking. But my feet felt different on the pavement. Heavier, slower, the taller one. Diane is 5'8". Ava is 5'4". That detail shouldn't have meant much on its own. One neighbor, bad lighting, no glasses. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself Frank was a sweet old man who probably barely saw anything at all. But I couldn't stop turning it over. Because here's the thing about being a nurse for over a decade. You learn to pay attention to the things that don't quite fit. A symptom that doesn't match the diagnosis. A patient who looks fine on paper but something's just off. You develop a kind of internal alarm system. And standing there on that sidewalk with a paper bag full of groceries, mine was going off. When I got back to the house, Diane was in the kitchen making coffee. She had her back to me when I walked in. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. The way she moved, easy, unbothered, like nothing in the world was pressing down on her. And I thought about how calm she'd been when I told her the police called. I thought about how quickly she'd explained Frank away before I even had a chance to mention him. I thought about the night of the accident, how perfectly her story had matched my mom's, right down to the same specific details about Cactus Road. People who are telling the truth don't always remember things the same way. They get details wrong. They contradict each other on small things. That's normal. But Diane and my mom had told it like they'd rehearsed it. At the time, I'd found that reassuring. Now it felt like something else entirely. I didn't say anything to Diane. I put the groceries away and went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself one neighbor's fuzzy impression didn't cancel out 2 eyewitness accounts from people I'd known my whole life. But later that night, I saw something I couldn't ignore. When I saw the footage, my entire world shifted in seconds. It was around 9 that night. I was sitting on my bed, still turning Frank's words over in my head, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank's wife, Sandra. She and I weren't close, but we'd exchanged numbers years back for neighborhood watch stuff. The text said, "Melissa, Frank told me he talked to you this morning. I think you should come over. We have something on our doorbell camera you might want to see." I stared at that message for a full 30 seconds. Then I grabbed my keys, I knocked on their door, and Sandra answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. She led me into their living room where Frank was already sitting at the coffee table with his laptop open. He looked up at me and said, with a quiet seriousness that hadn't been in his voice that morning, "I pulled up the footage after I talked to you. I think you need to see this yourself." He turned the laptop toward me. The footage was from their doorbell camera, which sits at an angle that catches most of the street and a good portion of our driveway. The timestamp read Sunday, 9:47 p.m. The image was grainy but clear enough. I leaned in closer. What I saw made my breath stop in my chest. The silver Civic was pulling out of our driveway, and behind the wheel, caught for just a moment in the ambient glow of the streetlight, was Diane. It was her. The height, the build, the way she moved her head. It was unmistakably my sister. Not Ava, Diane. My hands gripped the edge of the coffee table. Frank reached over and hit play on a second clip. This one was from about 2 minutes earlier in the timestamp, and it had audio. The camera must have picked up voices carrying from our driveway. The recording was scratchy and broken in places, but enough came through. I heard Diane's voice first. Sharp and low, she said, "Just go back inside. If something happens tonight, I'll say you were driving. Nobody's gonna believe you over me, and Mom anyway." Then there was a pause, and then I heard Ava's voice, higher and tight with panic, saying, "Are you serious right now? You can't do that." And then the sound of a car door slamming, then the engine turning over, then silence. The room around me went completely quiet. Sandra had her hand pressed to her mouth. Frank was watching me carefully, not saying a word. I straightened up slowly. My legs felt like they weren't fully connected to the rest of my body. Everything I had believed for the past 3 days was rearranging itself inside my head, piece by piece, like a structure collapsing in slow motion. Diane had been driving. Diane had planned it. And my mom, my own mother, had stood in that living room and backed her up without missing a beat. And Ava, my daughter, had stood right in front of me and told me the truth. She'd said I didn't drive that car and please believe me, and I had looked her in the eyes and chosen not to. The weight of that landed on me all at once, right there in Frank and Sandra's living room, and it was almost physical. Like something dropped onto my chest from a great height. My throat closed up. My eyes burned. Frank said to me, gently but firmly, "We can send you the files. Both clips. You can take them to whoever you need to." I managed to say thank you. I don't know how my voice came out as steady as it did. Sandra walked me to the door and said to me quietly, "I'm sorry, honey. I really am." I nodded. I stepped out into the warm night air and stood on their front porch for a moment, just breathing. Across the street, our house sat with the lights on in the living room window. Diane was probably in there right now, my mom too. Both of them completely unaware that the story they had built so carefully had just come apart. I thought about Ava upstairs in her room. I thought about the look on her face when I'd told her the police called. That quiet, hollow defeat. She'd known this moment would never come. She'd already accepted that nobody was going to believe her. And she'd been right. Until now. In that moment, I knew 2 things. My daughter was innocent, and I had already failed her. But there was still time to fix it. I walked into that room with proof. And this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk with my phone in my hand, watching both clips over and over until the images were burned into the back of my eyelids. Frank had sent the files within the hour, just like he said he would. I forwarded them to my email, saved them in 2 separate places, and then I sat there in the dark thinking about exactly what I was going to do next. By 6 in the morning, I had called Officer Reyes and left a message saying I had new evidence relevant to the case and needed to speak with him urgently. By 8, he had called back. I told him what I had. He told me to bring the files in and that he'd be in touch about next steps. And then, I hung up and just sat there for a minute because what came next wasn't the police station. What came next was that living room downstairs. I found Diane and my mom both in the kitchen when I came down. Diane was leaning against the counter, scrolling her phone. My mom was at the stove. The scene looked so ordinary it almost made me sick. I set my phone face up on the kitchen table, pulled up the first clip, hit play, and said to both of them, my voice flat and steady, "I need you to watch this." Diane looked up. My mom turned around. And for a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Diane's eyes dropped to the phone screen. I watched her face as the footage played. I watched the exact moment she recognized what she was seeing. The casual expression she'd been wearing just evaporated. Her jaw tightened. The hand holding her coffee cup went very still. When the clip ended, the kitchen was completely silent. My mom had moved closer to see the screen. She was gripping the edge of the counter now, not saying anything. I picked my phone back up and said to Diane, looking directly at her, "That's you behind the wheel, not Ava, you." Diane set her cup down slowly. Then she lifted her chin and said to me, her voice carefully controlled, "That footage is grainy. You can't tell who that is for certain." Something sharp and cold moved through me right then. I said to her, "Play it again and tell me that with a straight face." She didn't answer. I pulled up the second clip, the audio one. I hit play and set the phone on the table between us. Diane's own voice filled that kitchen. Sharp and low, every word clear enough. "Just go back inside. If something happens tonight, I'll say you were driving. Nobody's gonna believe you over me and Mom anyway." And then Ava's voice, panicked and disbelieving. And then the car door. When it ended, I looked at my sister and said, "That's your voice. That's you telling my 17-year-old daughter that you were going to frame her." Diane's composure cracked then, not all at once. It happened in stages, like watching a wall take on water. First, her eyes shifted away from mine. Then her shoulders dropped. Then she pressed her hand flat on the table and said, her voice dropping almost to a murmur, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Right then, a fury rose up in me so fast and so complete that I had to take a breath before I said anything. I said to her, slow and deliberate, "You didn't mean for it to go this far. Diane, the police were about to charge my daughter. My 17-year-old kid was looking at a DUI on her record before she's even out of high school. Do you understand what that would have done to her life?" Diane looked down at the table. She didn't answer. I turned to my mom then, and that was almost harder. Because my mom wasn't looking at me like a person caught in a lie. She was looking at me like someone who had already made peace with what she'd done and was just waiting for the storm to pass. I said to her, and I couldn't keep all of the hurt out of my voice when I did, "You stood right there and backed her up. You told me you saw Ava take those keys. You looked me in the eye." My mom pressed her lips together and said quietly, "I was trying to keep this family together. Diane needed help, and I thought we could handle it without it becoming a whole big thing." I stared at her. I said, "You let your granddaughter take the blame to protect Diane. That's what you did. That's what keeping the family together looked like." She didn't respond to that. 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. Officer Reyes had moved fast. I'd already texted him the clips directly after the confrontation started, and he told me to stay put. When they knocked on the door and I let them in, Diane was still sitting at that kitchen table. She'd barely moved. One of the officers spoke with her briefly, and within a few minutes it became clear that the story she and my mom had given was falling apart in real time. Diane didn't fight it for long. With the footage sitting right there and her own voice on that audio clip, there wasn't much left to fight with. She confirmed she had been the one driving. She confirmed she'd been drinking, and she confirmed she had told Ava to go back inside before taking the car. I didn't feel relief when she said it. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired and gutted and desperate to get upstairs. I took the steps 2 at a time. I knocked on Ava's door and pushed it open without waiting. She was sitting on her bed, earbuds in, textbook open in her lap. When she saw my face, she pulled the earbuds out slowly and said to me, her voice careful and guarded, "What's going on?" I crossed the room and sat down on the edge of her bed. And then I said to her the words I should have said 3 days ago when she first stood in front of me and told me the truth. I said, "I believe you. I'm sorry. I should have believed you from the beginning." For a second, she just looked at me. Then her face did something I wasn't prepared for. It didn't light up with relief. It crumpled. The way a person's face crumples when they've been holding something together for too long and someone finally tells them they don't have to anymore. She leaned into me, and I put my arms around her, and she cried in a way that was quiet and exhausted and absolutely heartbreaking. I held her and I didn't say anything else for a while. Because there was nothing else to say right then that would have been enough. As the truth finally came out, I realized something else. This family was never going to be the same again. 6 months have passed since that day, and my life looks nothing like it used to. Ava and I moved out about 3 weeks after the confrontation. We found a small 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Phoenix. It's not fancy. The kitchen is tiny, and the parking lot light flickers, and we can hear the neighbors through the walls sometimes. But it's ours, just ours. And on the first night we slept there, with boxes still stacked in every corner and no curtains on the windows yet. Ava sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor eating pizza straight from the box and looked around the room with something on her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked relaxed. Genuinely, quietly relaxed. She looked over at me and said with a small smile, "This place is kind of perfect." And I meant it when I said back to her, "Yeah, it really is." The charges against Ava were dropped completely once the footage was submitted and Diane's statement was revised. Officer Reyes was straightforward and professional throughout the whole process, and I'm grateful for that. As for Diane, she faced her own legal consequences. I won't go into every detail because honestly it's still working its way through the system. But the reckless driving, the DUI, the false police report, none of that went away just because the truth came out. It followed her, as it should. My relationship with my mom is essentially non-existent right now. I haven't cut her off with any dramatic announcement. There was no big final conversation. I just stopped calling. And she stopped calling too, after a while. Maybe she's waiting for me to come around. Maybe she knows I won't. I don't know. What I do know is that I can't look at her the same way. When I think about her standing in that kitchen, nodding along to Diane's story, backing it up with her own details, watching me doubt my own daughter, I feel something I don't have a clean word for. It's not just anger, it's grief. Because the version of my mom I thought I knew, the woman I believed would always choose what was right, that version doesn't exist anymore. And you can't unknow that about someone. Ava is doing better. She's seeing a therapist every 2 weeks, which was her idea, not mine, and I respect her so much for that. She's back to being herself in most ways. Laughing at things, texting me random stuff during the day, leaving her shoes in the middle of the floor where I'll definitely trip over them. But there are moments, quiet ones, where I catch her looking at me with something cautious still sitting behind her eyes. Like she's waiting to see what I'll do when it matters. And I understand that. I broke something when I chose not to believe her. I know that. I can apologize 100 times, and I have. But trust isn't rebuilt with apologies. It's rebuilt with time and with consistency and with showing up the same way over and over again until the caution in her eyes starts to ease. That's the work I'm doing now, every single day. If I'm being completely honest with you, the hardest part of this whole thing isn't what Diane did. It isn't even what my mom did. The hardest part is knowing that I had every opportunity to listen to my daughter, and I didn't. She told me the truth from the very beginning. 5 words. "Mom, I didn't drive." 5 words, and I chose 2 adults over her. That's something I'll carry for a long time, but I'm choosing to carry it as a lesson, not just as guilt. Because guilt without change is just pain. And I've had enough pain. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you're a parent, and your kid is standing in front of you telling you something that everyone else is contradicting, slow down. I know how hard that is when you're exhausted and overwhelmed, and 3 people are all saying the same thing in the same direction. I know how easy it is to let the majority win, but your child deserves that pause. They deserve you saying, "Wait, let me think about this." They deserve the benefit of the doubt, because at the end of the day, the people who love you the most aren't always the ones who tell you the truth. And the person telling you the truth isn't always the one with the loudest voice in the room. Trust must be earned, even in family, especially in family. So I'll leave you with one question. If you were in my position, if it was 3 adults against your child's word, would you have believed your kid? I'd really love to know what you think. Leave it in the comments below. And if this story made you stop and think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Take care of yourselves. And take care of the people who are counting on you to listen.